Hello, everybody. Andrew Darnton. And, right, I'm going to say a little bit, maybe, I'm going to briefly talk about theory, because I just like talking about theory, and you'll be amazed how practical it is. And then we'll get on to an activity which features these big bed sheets on your tables. Thank you for having me, Hayley. I'm here in part because of work we've been doing in Derbyshire, where we've been testing out a new way of measuring change in complex systems, which I'll come on to explain. And I took part in the think tank the other day, and it was kind of a game of two halves, I think. And the first part of the think tank was talking about what the evaluation challenge was for Greater Manchester Moving. And it transpires that there are two ways of using evaluation. That's what came out in the first half. So I wrote a little table on the flip chart, and it looks a bit like this. So I've just written it up. And at the heart of it are these two questions. There's a question about what works, which is your usual evaluation question. Yeah? So the evaluator comes along from outside of the system to tell you whether what you're doing is good or not. Quite often to report to the person who's funding it. And that's one of the reasons that you get that side effect that the evaluation comes along after, that has been mentioned. We know we have to build this in from the start. That's the beginning of it. But asking a different question is critical. Yeah? And if we understand obesity and physical activity to be complex systems, and if we understand the Greater Manchester constellation of physical activity stakeholders and actors, let alone participants, to be a complex system, which it is, as we've just been hearing from Nick, when you start to work at scale, population, city scale, city region scale now. The first question is, what is going on? It's a good question. The main question that dominates evaluation at the moment from the government point of view is what works. They have what works centres, they have what works for ageing, they have what works for education. If we're not careful, we'll get what works for physical activity. And we'll have a lot of pedometers. Yeah. What is going on is a question that comes from psychotherapy. It's like psychotherapy shorthand. When a person goes into therapy, the question the therapist asks themselves is WIGO. So it's very nice we've had WIGO already. What's going on? Until we know what's going on, there's no point asking what works, right? So let me just run down the difference between these two styles of question. I'm actually going to, I'm going to work down the left-hand column because it's simpler than going by pair. So what works is for bounded interventions, yeah, where we've got a program, it's been funded for something, and we can measure it against something, yeah? It's got preset objectives. We're going to count minutes, how much moderate to vigorous, how far, how often. Those things become KPIs, and we know who the target audience is. And it's boxed off in time and place. Yeah? So it happens in one of those local authority areas, even though the difference is 0.02 between there and next door, and there and next door actually only becomes next door when you draw it on a map. All good? We're familiar with that, if you like. Yeah? But the challenge of Greater Manchester Moving is one of innovation. Yeah? You read the plan. If you, Jenny Price's forward even says, this is about population change, whole system interventions. What do we do in that context? Because that stuff's being measured. So if there is uptick in people walking and cycling and doing minutes, well, presumably that's to the credit of the interventions anyway, because they've already got the cash to do that stuff. So what did Greater Manchester Moving contribute? Apart from, lovely days like this where we all come together, which, as we will discover, are not to be undervalued. So if we work in a complex system, complex systems are irritating to policy people because they are characterized by low control and high uncertainty. Yeah? All sorts of people are doing all sorts of things for all sorts of reasons that they haven't made explicit to us. And the thing about a system that makes it a system rather than a collection of parts, rather than being complicated like an aeroplane, a forest is a complex system, right? Because things are living in it, they're dynamic, they bounce off each other. And things will happen. A system keeps producing its outcomes, even if we intervene in it. That's why obesity is so hard to do. I don't know if you've seen the spaghetti map for obesity. The Foresight map's got like zillions, I can't remember, 8 buttons, and they're all linked. And policymakers go, oh, shit, what am I going to do? And you say, well, you have to press that one and that one and that one and that one and that one all at the same time. Because it's a system. Because if you just press one, it will bounce back. Yeah? If you weed kill over here, the weeds grow over there. You'll be familiar with this. Yeah? So what are the emergent properties? So we need to be able to think about what the system's going to produce. We need to be able to think about the future, not the past, in our measurement. What the outcomes are is the central question for me. What are we measuring? What do we think is good? And if we thought about what Elaine was saying this morning about the Daily Mile, clearly one of her metrics is smiling girls. Yeah? So smiling girls, tick. Yeah? Not minutes, not miles. All the actors in the system are equal. In a complex system, as you know, systems are flat. They're not vertical. Yeah? The governance of sport is vertical. Doing exercise is flat. Right? And in order to know what's going on, we need to be able to reach out with our tentacles into all corners of the system. Elaine said she didn't even know this morning, it's not criticism, she did not know how many schools have a track for doing the Daily Mile and how many just run around the hall zillions of times. She does not know because she is not in charge. Yeah? If we want to know, we would need to ask the people who do the Daily Mile. It is different in every school it happens. And in a complex system, happily, we don't have time boundaries. I'm shockingly bad at time, which is why Fiona's sat here going like this. Because we don't have starts and finishes. It's a continuum. We haven't just rocked up to Manchester. This is where your data, the baselining data is so interesting. We haven't just rocked up today. This isn't the first day anybody did physical activity in Manchester. There's all sorts of stuff that we're building on, all sorts of inherited issues and histories and trajectories. And when we go, those trajectories will carry on, even when you take all the funding out of the system. One of my big beefs with the Olympics is that we talked about legacy, as if there was a massive fireworks display, and then the question was, how long afterwards will we talk about it for? Whereas in fact, the Olympics should be, in a complex system, if you understand it from a system point of view, the Olympics is a symptom or an event that comes out of a process by which we as a country care, we fund it, we think we're going to bid, we get it, we run it, and life goes on. It's not 3 weeks of chucking cash against a wall. What do you mean? Right. Sorry. What works evaluation is done for accountability, and therefore the people who do it, so those of you who are like practitioners, frontline people, tracksuit fellas and ladies, usually find yourselves doing evaluation for the funder to justify your work. And quite often you won't even read the report. Tell me I'm wrong. If it's sent to you, that's not your blame. You're not relevant. What's going on is about understanding what's going on in a system in which we are all equal actors. So it's for explaining. And explaining to ourselves as much as to another person. If we know what we're trying to do in Greater Manchester, if we all know, then we'll get it done. And that's what Greater Manchester Moving's about. Yeah? In my basic understanding. So what works is for behaviour change. What is going on is for system change. The interventions are there, they're out there already for getting people off the couch in various places. But how do we wire them together, and how would we know? How would we know what we had achieved as a system? Yeah, each of us will go back to our organisations, but what are we today? Yeah? What will we achieve? Yeah? And this is one of the reasons why we should spend more of our time talking with each other than being talked at. We need both styles. I'm not saying that one is better than the other. Yeah? We need to know how many people, we need all the data side that was discussed this morning. It helps us think, but it also helps us know whether we've been effective by some measures which are very important, which is physical activity. But we also need to know whether children are happy and whether they will grow into happy adults. Yeah? We've got the stuff on the left, the what works stuff, we're quite well catered for. And one of the things we looked at as an input at the think tank was the Sport England evaluation framework, which I like and I'm very happy to talk about. And Nick's worked on a number of frameworks and he helped write the Public Health England framework. And whatever happens for GM Moving will need to provide you with resource so you can measure the impact of what you are doing against ideally some shared metrics. So the Sport England framework has a common question set. So we can all collect the same data and make comparisons between our interventions in different places. But we also need to think about how we evaluate the system. And one of the slightly weird things was that there aren't that many methodologies out there. And this is what, so I've got a fellowship at Surrey at the moment in the part of something which is a centre for evaluating complexity. And there's a load of pointy-headed evaluators wondering about how to evaluate in complex systems, doing all kinds of strange agent-based modelling, contribution analysis, qualitative component analysis, all kinds of strange and difficult, intellectually rigorous activities. And this revaluation thing has managed to find itself a place at that table. We've had this conversation, I know Hayley's had it probably with more people than me, about who should be in the room today. And there you have it. So I'm delighted that housing associations are here. On my table, we've got housing associations, the Ramblers, and the Football Association. That's a good start. Success by one measure. I mean, I'm all... Yeah, I don't want to tell you the answers, but I am quite interested in who's in the room. Because that's where the change will come from. Because we're a complex system. That's... I did some work for Oxfam a few years ago, and it was their 50th birthday. And Oxfam really like all the big NGOs, making money, donations. And I suggested for their 50th birthday, they could just ask their members, anybody who'd ever been a member of Oxfam, because one of the problems is people sign up to direct debit and then quit. Right, so there's a lot of churn in that market. And I just suggested, why don't you invite Oxfam members to hold tea parties locally with anybody who'd ever been an Oxfam member? And they went ashen-faced at the prospect, and it never happened. Because it's too risky. It's too flat. It's too open. The work that's been done with the beginnings of this revaluation work, so it's been used in Active for Life by Derbyshire Community Sports Trust are using it in 4 places, including Gamesley, we've just been talking about difficult places to do physical activity work. I've just been sent a load of report running through this evaluation grid for This Girl Can in Ripley, the Ripley version. And it's extremely striking how, in those places, the conversations are starting with members of the community. There are like sort of enabler people whose job is just to tie together. They don't bring money to get people moving. They try to tie together what's already in a community. You know, Gamesley has a blooming great sports centre, but it's also got fences around it with signs on saying no ball games. And the person to speak to there is a lady who is deeply immersed in community fundraising and very cynical about statutory services. But she can get everybody out on a Friday afternoon for, you know, grands and kids park games. It doesn't even look like you thought it would look. Do you know what I mean? So who's in the room is an absolutely critical question, and the broader the better. Okay. All right, I'm going to just keep going so that I can stop going so that you can sit on your tables and do work, please. So the crux of this is the question is measure what matters. Yeah? Who knows what matters? Sport England sort of know what matters, but communities and people know what matters. They know what the benefits of physical activity are. Talking to Elaine again, she does not know why schools do the Daily Mile. She has no power over them to do the Daily Mile. 5 years after the event, the government are turning up telling schools to do the Daily Mile. Nobody told them to do the Daily Mile. Nobody told them to do the Daily Mile. Yeah? They're doing it because it matters, because they want to do it, because kids do it, because parents do it, because it makes them happy. So revaluation came out of work on something called NHS Change Day in 2015, where people in the NHS do stuff for patients, and they're often very low status people, like there's a male dementia nurse in Chester, and he does work where he gets all family and friends to come and stay in the hospital over the weekend, and then they learn what it is to look after a relative with dementia. And he turned that into a training kit for how to dementia-friendly training for staff across the NHS, and this eventually came to the attention of Simon Stevens, and he ends up in Downing Street with David Cameron. Yeah? But nobody's in charge, he just did it because that's what he does. Yeah? And so we were told there was nobody in charge of this system, it can't be evaluated, but could you please evaluate it? And in the process, you might need to reimagine evaluation. So that's where we started mucking around with the second column, if you like. So this whole way of understanding value comes out of how people talk about value of their work. And in the process, when you start to invite people in to think about value, so I'm not evaluating them, we're all co-evaluators, you, if you like, give people back the power over their own data. If I take it off you, if you fill in my spreadsheet and file it with me and you never hear, I'm taking value out of the system. You're outsourcing measurement. But if we're in a conversation where it keeps going back, you know whether your stuff works. You begin to make judgments. You know yourself, you know your place, and you know what works in your place. It's very, very clear, because otherwise you'd give up and do something else. You are in no doubt. The system, however, is way, way, way up here and is in a lot of doubt about what's going on. So we just try and collect stories at different layers of the system. And in the process, things will change as we think about value. So with my pointy-headed colleagues at the Centre for Evaluation Complexity, one of the differences, so there's an argument about whether this is evaluation or not, right? Because one of the big rules of evaluation is that it doesn't change the thing that it's measuring. And there is also a controversy about whether that is possible. Schrodinger's cat is involved in the controversy, but you don't need to worry about that too much. The Hawthorne effect, all this kind of stuff. But we just go, look, if there's measurement, if you build measurement into the system, if you build a learning system into the system, your intervention, your action will be more effective. You will become better at what you do because there is a feedback loop. And that's surely what you're doing the evaluation for in the first place, wasn't it? That we can find interventions that work, show they work, and get funded to do more interventions like it. Well, cut out the middleman, just make your intervention better on a rolling basis in real time by knowing what it is you're doing. And so we just ask people about value. We just ask people to measure what matters. And this came out of the work in the NHS when we spoke to people about how they think about value. Now, you've got this on your table in two versions. There's a blank version, and then there's a filled-in version. Well, there's a kind of sketched-in version. Let me just tell you how this works. So when we rock up to a system, we say to people, what do you do? What matters in what your work? Where's the good stuff? This is the question I'm just about to ask you, by the way. Where is the good stuff in your work? And you will tell me. And I'll say, oh, and do you know what I'm interested in? I'm interested in value. Yeah, because I'm odd. I'm interested in value and theory. And I'm interested in value in 3 dimensions. Right? Now, the top row, so this is a way we think about value, but it's also a framework that you can then fill in, which is why you've got blanks on your table. So it becomes like the dashboard, the readout, very simple top-line readout, executive summary of what we have achieved or are measuring. The top row is about measurable, calculable value. Value that you can sum up, number. Yep? And that's the stuff that we've heard all about this morning. And Nick has begun to let a little bit of light in on, saying, healthy towns. Ooh, hello, there's a different way of doing it. The middle row is value that you weigh up, calibrate. Yeah? And people are very good at doing this. They do it all the time. They decide whether they're going to go to yoga or whether they're going to have a bath and an early night. And those things are completely different, and you're very capable of deciding whether they're worth doing. Yeah? So top row, value that we sum. Middle row, value that we weigh. Bottom row, value that we scale. What is going on in the sense of how big is the network? What are the connections? How are the joins in the work that I'm doing? Because it's those things. To what extent is it a system? Because it's those things that will make change in the future. So if you think of it as a network map, as a simple network map, the top row is how many nodes or points are there on my map? The second row is what are they like? Who are they? And the third row is and what are the connections between them? I'm actually interested in the links because people in the NHS told us the way you get change happen is by communicating with other people. Oh, that person, she's got brilliant networks. She can get that dementia-friendly training kit spread into 15 PCTs before breakfast. Yeah, that's what makes the change. And the difference between visible and invisible is slippery, slightly different in every setting, but it's broadly known data versus knowable data. Yeah? So we do know how many people are active, and we can, by reference to strange ways of econometric formulae, work out whether that's worth 22 million or 26 million pounds to Greater Manchester in a year, and then we can argue about it. Yeah? And that would move us from the top left box into the top right box, from visible, but yes, there are people who are doing things, into, and what's the pound value of that in the top right. So I also put things like carbon dioxide, CO2, when I'm doing climate change, that goes in the top right. Quality of life years, that could go in the top right, when we're converting data from one thing to another. Calibrate visible is the things people say they like, the benefits, the stuff that is just there, what do you get out of it? Smiles, happy children, all the photos, they're all in that box. I accept photos, by the way. Photos are data. Calibrate invisible is when we connect all that together, what are the ideas and the learnings that have value collectively? So it's just become a little bit more, when we reflect on that, it just becomes a bit more abstract. So we can say, oh, resilience, agency, those kind of things go in there. Yeah? In the bottom row, capacitate visible, who's in my network? Capacitate invisible, what are the emergent effects of that going to be? Where is all this going to lead? So we did some work in Coventry, which incidentally was funded to get disabled people physically active. And one of the things we identified, they do a slow roll, which I had to go on, because if you don't go, you can't see the system. So I spent Sunday afternoon with my lad riding on a slow roll, which is, you ride bikes very, very slowly. There's 50 of you. Somebody's got a stereo, and you ride slowly so that the disabled kids don't get dropped off the back. Yeah. And you just ride very, very slowly, and you do different bits of Coventry. And some people come because they like riding. Some people come because they like socialising. Some people come because they want to learn new routes around Coventry. Everybody's there for a different reason. Everybody's getting multiple benefits from this thing, and nobody's in charge. And in that model, we found out in Capacitate Invisible that they were just about to make Coventry a cycling town because all the council has put in all the infrastructure, and what they're missing is critical mass. And this group, this community group of mums, largely, can deliver critical mass in Coventry. They can pick which communities they ride to each week. They can try and pull members of the community in so that when you ride along, you wave to your mates. Oh, visible cycling. Yeah. And 3 more years of that, and Coventry's a cycling city. Bang. Done. They've got the infrastructure, they just don't have the people. And again, that would play back to the Gamesley example I gave earlier. They've got the infrastructure, it's just not something that you do around here. Okay, so let's have an exercise. This is the other side of the sheet. This says in like Janet and Jane language, what goes in which box. It's a load more complicated than that and richer, and you can innovate, please do. But what I would like you to do is form pairs or trios, whatever, around your table, smallish groupish, and somebody be prepared to tell a story about their work. Now, the obvious way to do this is if you've got an intervention. So I run X program for X audience with thing, yeah? And it might work quite nicely in threes. Somebody could ask them questions about it, and the other person can start trying to plot. As they hear things, can start trying to drop them into these boxes. Yeah? Play with it, see how you go, take half an hour. It might be quite interesting, take 20 minutes. 25, maybe 26. Depends how much feedback we have. If you're having a great time, just have a great time. And I was one of those people who wanted to stay until 8. So if you've got an intervention you want to talk about and just play and start to see how it fits, do that. If you just go to work in an office and don't ever have to get people to put trainers on, that might work too. See what happens. See what metrics you would be using which might connect with this, because you too are part of this system. And at the end, if one did this for real, we would all make stories, we'd iterate our stories at different levels of the system, right up to GM moving office and even the mayor's office. What does he think about GM moving? Where's the value? How does he count value? And then we'll all come together in a room. So I'm looking forward to this day in about 3 years' time, I hope, when we've got Andy Burnham and some people from Hattersley, residents, and we all bring our 6 boxes and we make one 6-box account of what we've achieved for the whole system. Fun. Okay. The evaluation people will help you a little bit if you need help.